He was the kind of man who bought silence with checks. The kind of man who didn't believe in children. Until the day he walked into an orphanage, signed a form to improve his image, and met a little girl with his eyes. He adopted her out of obligation, but fell in love when it was already too late. Because she wasn't just any child. She was his. Welcome back, soul seekers, to Hearts of the Rich, where the wealthy may wear gold, but their hearts are often wrapped in secrets. If you're here, maybe you believe what we believe, that even the powerful can be broken, that even the untouchable can be undone by love they never saw coming. So, if you're ready to feel something real, subscribe to Hearts of the Rich and like this video now, to help stories like this reach the people who need them most. And in the comments, tell me, do you believe fatherhood can find you, even when you run from it? Type, I believe in second chances, because this one's going to stay with you. His name was Graham Maddox, CEO of Maddox Holdings. 41, never married, no children, at least none he knew of. To most people, he was the face of control, the man who built an empire by saying no more than yes. He didn't do emotions, he didn't do press, and he definitely didn't do public relations fluff like charitable adoptions. But the board had insisted. Your numbers are golden, his advisor said, but your humanity rating is ice cold. So he'd agreed to one visit, one staged appearance at a private orphanage his company had funded overseas, one carefully curated list of media-appropriate children, one photo, one check, done. That was the plan, until he walked through the door and saw her. She was sitting in the corner, not with the others, not smiling for the camera, just drawing, quiet, still, like the world had already taught her not to expect anything. She looked up, big, sharp gray eyes, a scar under her left eyebrow. No one else seemed to notice, but Graham froze, because he had seen those eyes before, in the mirror. He didn't speak to her right away. He walked past, let the media tour unfold, shook hands, nodded at hopeful eyes he didn't intend to remember. But that girl, she kept drawing, and when he glanced again, he saw the sketch. It was a woman, long hair, sad eyes, holding a baby, underneath it, in uneven, blocky handwriting. My mommy, I miss you. He stopped breathing, because he recognized her, not the child, the woman in the drawing. Her name was Eve Carson, and she had been his first real love. Graham didn't say a word for the rest of the tour. He went through the motions, shook the hands, gave the smile, but his thoughts never left the little girl in the corner with the drawing pad and the scar beneath her brow. Back in the car, he gripped the headrest in front of him, voice low. Elise, find everything you can on Eve Carson. His assistant blinked. From college. He didn't look at her. Yes, you haven't mentioned her in. Just find her. 2 days later, the report landed on his desk. Thin, almost nothing inside. No recent addresses. No social profiles. No bank activity in over 5 years. But at the bottom of the file, one word hit him like a gunshot. Deceased. A car accident. No next of kin. No obituary that made headlines. Just a footnote in a police database from a small town 2 hours outside the city. Eve Carson was gone, and now a little girl with her eyes was sitting in an orphanage. With his. Graham stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse that night, glass in hand, tie loosened. The city shimmered beneath him, cold and bright and meaningless. He had loved Eve once, back before the company, back before the quarterly reports and the bloodless suits, back when he still believed in breakfast at midnight and handwritten notes and watching someone sleep just because their breathing soothed you. But they had ended in silence. He'd chosen his career. She'd walked away. No drama. No diving. Just absence. He never knew why she didn't fight. And now, looking at that drawing again, the way the girl had drawn the mother's hands around the baby, the tear on her cheek, he realized she hadn't been alone. She'd been protecting something, someone, and now he was the last one left. The next morning, he didn't call the board. He didn't call the press. He got in the car, drove back to the orphanage, and asked one question. Can I speak with her? The director blinked. With whom? The girl, the one in the corner. She draws. She's quiet. Oh, you mean Hope. The name cracked his chest open. Hope, he whispered. The director smiled. She's not usually up for conversation, but she's in the garden. You can try. He found her near a tree, tracing something in the dirt with a stick. She didn't look up when he approached. He knelt beside her. Silence. Then, finally, I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. His voice caught. That's smart. She paused. You look like me, she said quietly. He smiled. Barely. You noticed that, huh? She nodded. You have the same eyes as the picture of my mommy's friend. She drew him once. He swallowed hard. And what happened to your mommy? Hope stared straight ahead. She went to the stars. His throat tightened. He looked down at the dirt and saw what she was drawing. A house. For stick figures. One big one. One medium. One small. And one holding a balloon that said, me. That night, he filled out the papers. Not for PR. Not for the board. Not for guilt. For her. He didn't know how to be a father, but he knew what it meant to leave someone behind. And this time, he wouldn't do it again. The adoption moved fast. When a man like Graham Maddox signed paperwork, systems moved. Lawyers cleared paths. Judges expedited signatures. There were no questions. No dudas. Just headlines. CEO Graham Maddox adopts orphan girl in quiet legal move. Is Maddox becoming a father or softening his brand? He ignored them. He had work to do, and not the kind that fit inside spreadsheets or suits. He brought her home on a Thursday. A car seat in the back of a Bentley. A pink backpack with a zipper that stuck. One crayon portrait folded carefully in the front pocket. She sat in the corner of the penthouse living room while he took a call. Didn't speak, didn't move, just clutched his stuffed bear that had been sewn and re-sewn too many times to count. When he hung up, he crouched down. You hungry? She shrugged. I've got grilled cheese. And soup. Nothing. But I also have marshmallows. She looked up, slightly. He handed her a bowl with one single marshmallow floating in warm cocoa. She took it, silently, but she didn't let go of the bear. That night, he tucked her into the guest bedroom, now filled with books, stars on the ceiling, and a framed photo of Eve he'd found in an old drawer. Hope stared at it for a long time. She used to sing to me, she said softly. His hand froze on the edge of the blanket. Even when she was sick, she never stopped singing. He blinked fast. She was strong, he whispered. She was sad. He nodded. Then quietly, so was I. She rolled on her side, clutched the bear, eyes fluttering. And then, just before they closed, she whispered it. Soft. Tentative. Raw. Good night, Daddy. He didn't breathe. Not for a full 10 seconds. And when he finally exhaled, he did so with tears running silently down his face. Not because he earned the word, but because she gave it anyway. It was hidden in the back of the stuffed bear. Hope had fallen asleep early, curled in her new bed with her cheek pressed against the faded fabric. Graham had gone to pick it up, gently, carefully, when he felt something shift. Not stuffing. Paper. He turned the bear over, saw the small tear in the seam along the back. He unstitched it slowly, heart thudding. Inside, a folded letter. Yellowed edges. Faint scent of lavender and dust. The handwriting, his chest tightened. Eve's. He sat down. Alone. The city blinking quietly outside the window. And read. To the person reading this. If it's Graham, I don't know if you ever came looking for us. And if you didn't, I don't blame you. You chose your future. You chose Mina. And I never hated you for it. But if you're holding this, then it means something happened. Something final. And I'm gone. Her name is Hope. She likes dinosaurs and warm socks. She cries when it rains, but never tells you why. She doesn't like loud voices, but she'll listen if you kneel when you talk. She's yours, Graham. From the second I saw her face, I knew. And I didn't tell you, not because I wanted to punish you, but because I didn't want your love to feel like obligation. I wanted her to be someone's choice. And if you're still reading this, maybe she finally is. If you can't raise her, it's okay. But don't leave her wondering why you didn't try. She's everything I ever hoped for. She's everything good I left in this world. Take care of her the way you never took care of me. And maybe, just maybe, take care of yourself too. Love, Eve. The letter slipped from his fingers. He didn't cry the way he had when Hope said Daddy. This time he broke. Full-bodied, shoulders shaking. The kind of grief that comes not from loss, but from realization. that he had been loved once, and left it behind. And now, the only piece of it left was sleeping in the next room. He walked to her doorway, watched her breathe, and whispered, "I won't leave again. Not this time. Not ever." Graham remembered the last time he saw Eve. It came back to him suddenly, the night he read her letter, as if her voice had been waiting in the corners of his mind for permission to speak again. It was raining then, too. She'd come to his office late, without an appointment. No umbrella, hair damp, eyes tired, shoulders carrying something heavier than he realized at the time. He had just closed a deal. His assistant was pouring champagne. The mood was high, but when Eve walked in, everything else dimmed. "I won't stay long," she said. "I just wanted to say goodbye." He blinked. "Goodbye. I'm leaving. The city, the job, all of it." He didn't get up. "Why?" She laughed softly. "Sadly, because I'm pregnant, Graham." Silence. It echoed louder than any answer ever could. His jaw flexed. His throat closed. But he said nothing. "You don't have to be involved," she said quickly. "I didn't come for that. I thought you should know." He swallowed hard. And then, because fear wore the same suit as ambition, he said the one thing that broke everything. "Is it even mine?" Her face went blank. Not angry, not hurt, just numb. "That's what I thought," she whispered. She turned to leave. And this time, he let her. He never told anyone. Not Elise, not the press, not his reflection in the mirror. But now, with her letter on the table and hope breathing softly down the hall, he wished he could go back to that night. Not to say yes, but to say please don't walk away. Because what he lost that day wasn't just Eve. It was the chance to be this man, before it was too late. She asked it on a Tuesday. No warning, no build-up. Just one of those quiet days where the sky hung gray and the air outside felt like something waiting to break. They were sitting on the living room floor, a puzzle between them, half finished, edge pieces scattered, a few missing. Graham had just gotten home early, canceled 2 meetings, told Elise to clear the rest of the day. Hope had barely spoken since school. Her teacher had emailed, said she'd been quiet again, a little withdrawn. He hadn't pushed, not until she placed a piece in the wrong spot. Then frowned, then whispered, "Are you going to leave too?" He froze, looked up, and saw it in her face. Not a tantrum, not fear, not manipulation. Just a child's question. Simple, devastating. He set the puzzle piece down and turned fully toward her. "Where did that come from?" She shrugged, eyes focused on the floor. "You're busy. You talk to the phone a lot. You leave for long hours. Sometimes I think maybe..." Her voice cracked. "Maybe you'll decide I'm too much." Graham felt the air leave his lungs. She wasn't being dramatic. She was telling the truth, her truth. The truth of a little girl who had lost her mother, been handed to strangers, moved through places that smiled for funding but offered nothing warm. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was asking for proof. He reached for her hand, held it, and then, because actions were louder in her world than words, he stood, walked to his office, and came back with a key. He placed it in her hand. "What's this?" she asked. "It's the key to my apartment," he said. "But I want you to keep it." She blinked. "Why?" "Because it's your home now," he said. "And no one, not even me, can lock you out." Her lip trembled. "Even if I mess up? Especially then." She lunged forward, not with elegance or grace, just the full-bodied desperation of a child who hadn't had a safe lap to fall into in too long. He caught her, held her, let her cry, and with every small sob, he let go of the man who once thought silence was strength. Because this was strength, and he was learning it now, from her. It started with whispers, a headline here, a press mention there. Then came the photos, blurry at first, then clearer. Graham Maddox leaving a school event, holding a child's hand at a museum, smiling, unscripted, human. The media called it rebranding. The board called it a distraction. He called it his life now. But they didn't care about that. They cared about profits, optics, control. And when you're the CEO of a global conglomerate that prides itself on ruthless precision, there isn't much room for bedtime stories and emotional softness. So they called a meeting, 12 men in tailored suits, one cold conference room, and him. Graham sat at the head of the table, calm, composed, and already bracing for the first blow. "We've reviewed your public activity," one of them began. Another cleared his throat. "Your domestic adjustments have become a focal point for media speculation." "I didn't realize being a father required board approval," Graham said flatly. "It doesn't," the CFO replied. "But when it affects shareholder confidence." "It hasn't. Not yet." The room tensed. Then came the pitchfork. "We believe it's time to consider a transition." Silence. "What kind of transition?" Graham asked. "A temporary reassignment of executive duties. Let the company stabilize. You can return once things normalize." Graham leaned back. "You want me to choose?" "It's not personal," someone muttered. But it was, and they all knew it. Because the version of him they had built their empire on, the untouchable, unfeeling machine, was gone. And in his place was a man who made grilled cheese on weekends. A man who left meetings early for school assemblies. A man who held a child's hand and called it his whole world. They didn't understand that man, so they wanted to remove him, before he made them feel, too. That night, he told Hope the truth. They sat on the balcony together, her knees pulled up to her chest, his arm wrapped around her small shoulders. "Some people don't like that I'm different now," he said softly. "They like the old me better, the one who didn't smile or feel." She looked up. "I like this you." He nodded. "Me too." She hesitated. "Are they going to take you away?" He kissed her temple. "No," he whispered. "They can take everything else, but not this." And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. He didn't need their approval. He didn't need their chair. He just needed her, and the man he was finally becoming. The next morning, he stepped into the same boardroom, dropped a letter of resignation on the table, and said, "I built this company, but I won't trade my daughter to keep it." Then walked out, head high, heart full, and completely free. That night, after the boardroom, after the press calls, after the adrenaline wore off, Graham had just started to fall asleep when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind. But then, the cry came again. Small, sharp, choked. He bolted out of bed and down the hall. Hope was sitting up in the middle of her bed, sheets twisted, hands over her ears, eyes wide open but not seeing. "No," she sobbed. "No, don't leave me." He didn't speak, didn't rush, just walked toward her, slowly, gently, and sat beside her. Her breathing was rapid, like a bird trapped in a glass room. He placed a hand on her back. She flinched, but didn't pull away. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here." She shook her head. "You left." Her voice was broken, barely there. "In the dream, you left. You said you're too busy, that I wasn't enough to stay for." His throat burned. He didn't say anything, didn't tell her it wasn't real, didn't try to fix it. He just wrapped his arms around her, held her against his chest until her heartbeat slowed, until the shaking stopped, until her fists uncurled. Minutes passed, maybe an hour, and then, finally, she whispered, "You came anyway." He nodded into her hair. Every time, she pulled the bear into her lap, didn't let go of his hand. "Will I always be scared?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes wide, older than any child should be. "Maybe," he said honestly, "but you won't be alone." She blinked, then laid back down, slowly, carefully, like the dream had left bruises on her soul. He stayed there the rest of the night, not because she asked, but because she didn't have to. And that, he realized, was the moment he became her father. Not by law, not by blood, but by presence. He didn't miss the skyscraper. Not once. Not the corner office. Not the luxury boardrooms. Not the daily power plays masked as meetings. What he missed was time. And now he had it. And he wasn't wasting a second. He and Hope settled into a rhythm. Slow mornings, early bedtime stories, therapy once a week. She was healing. So was he. But Graham couldn't stay still forever. He wasn't built for nothing. And one night, as he sat on the living room floor helping her untangle the ribbon from Craft Kit, she looked up and said, "Are you going to make something new?" He blinked. "What do you mean? You made a company before. Will you make one again?" He hadn't planned on it, but the way she asked, hopeful, curious, trusting, it stirred something old and something new inside him. Maybe it was time. He didn't call investors, didn't pitch to venture capitalists. Instead, he built it from the ground up. Something simple, purposeful, a foundation that helped fund transitional housing and private education for children aging out of foster care. Kids like Hope. He put everything into it: time, money, heart. And when it came time to name it, he asked her, "What should we call it?" She thought hard, crayons in hand, scribbling ideas. Then she held up a piece of paper. It said, "Maddox and Hope." He smiled. "That's perfect." She grinned. "Because now we both built something." Months passed. The foundation grew. So did Hope. She was laughing more, running more, sleeping through the night. She'd started calling him Dad instead of Daddy. And every time she did, it landed different. Like a quiet echo of the life he'd almost missed, but didn't, because he chose it. The press still tried to spin stories. Some called him reckless, emotional, weak, but he didn't care. Because one afternoon, as they stood in the kitchen baking cookies badly and burning half of them, she looked up and said, "Do you think Mommy can see us now?" He paused, looked at her, and nodded. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I think she sees everything." And somewhere inside, he hoped Eve knew that the girl she loved was loved again, by a man who finally became the father he should have been all along. It was just a school open house. Nothing fancy. Paper crafts, juice boxes, fluorescent lights. But to Graham Maddox, it felt like stepping into a foreign world. A world where name tags mattered more than titles, and eye contact was currency he hadn't carried in years. Hope held his hand the entire time. She was different here. Looser, lighter, like she'd started to believe the floor wouldn't fall out from under her if she laughed too loud. The teacher smiled when she saw him. "You must be Hope's father." Graham hesitated. He was still getting used to that word. Then Hope looked up at him, and without skipping a beat, she said, "Yep, that's my dad." 3 words. Simple, but to him, they landed like thunder. Not daddy, like in private. Not whispered under a breath. This was different. It was declaration, claiming, trust in front of people. She tugged his arm. "Come on, we're doing family drawings." He followed her to the crafts table, sat on a tiny plastic chair that made his knees ache, and took the crayon she handed him. "Draw me," she said. He smirked. "I'm terrible at this." "I'll help," she said. And she did, adding wild hair, 2 mismatched shoes, and a giant heart on the stick figure's chest. "That's because you feel big things now," she whispered. He blinked. "I do," he said. And when they finished, she wrote their names at the bottom. Just 2. Hope Maddox. Dad. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he had a name that meant something. It happened on a Thursday. Rain tapped the windows, slow and steady. Hope had been unusually quiet at breakfast, pushing cereal around with her spoon, backpack half zipped. He should have noticed, but he was distracted. Emails were piling, press was circling the foundation, and a former board member had just leaked a false rumor about misuse of funds. By the time they got in the car, Graham's chest was a knot of pressure and white-hot frustration. "Do you have your project?" he asked. Hope's eyes widened, then dropped. "No," she whispered. I left it at school yesterday." He exhaled. Hard. "Hope, we talked about this. You have to be responsible." She flinched. He didn't yell, but the sharpness in his tone felt like thunder anyway. "I'll go get it," she said quickly. "I'll tell Ms. Jennifer." "No," he snapped. "This is what happens when you don't focus. Do you know what they'll think when they find out I can't even keep my own kid organized?" She froze. Kid, not daughter, not Hope, just kid. Her chin dropped. He saw it, felt it, but he was too wound up to stop. "I have meetings. I have people watching every move I make, and I can't afford mistakes like this." She didn't say anything, didn't cry, just stared straight ahead. Small, silent, and that, more than anything, broke him. He didn't go to the meeting. He turned the car around, drove in silence, and when they got home, she walked straight to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and pulled the bear to her chest. He watched from the doorway, shattered, then knocked. "Hope." She didn't look up. "I'm sorry." Still silence. He walked in, slowly, sat across from her on the rug. "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that. That wasn't your fault. It was mine." Now she looked up, eyes glassy but strong. I thought maybe if I made one mistake, you'd take it all back." He felt the breath leave his lungs. "I'd never take it back," he whispered. Not 1 second. Not one mistake. You hear me? She didn't answer, just crawled into his lap and held him, tighter than before, forgiving him in the way only a child can. Not because he deserved it, but because she needed to believe he meant it. And he did. This time, he wasn't walking away. It was a quiet Sunday, Father's Day. He didn't expect anything. Not a card, not a gift, not even a mention. Graham had lived most of his life pretending the day didn't exist. His own father hadn't celebrated it, and he'd never imagined anyone would call him one. But that morning, Hope slipped a piece of folded paper under his door. No knock, no announcement, just the whisper of footsteps retreating down the hall. He sat on the edge of the bed, unfolded it, and stared. It was a drawing. 4 stick figures. One tall, one small, one holding a bear, and one in the middle, a woman drawn in soft lines and glowing yellow like sunlight. Eve, at the top, in crooked lettering. My first family, and my forever one. And underneath, Happy Father's Day, Dad. His throat closed. He didn't cry. He just pressed the paper to his chest. Because in that moment, he didn't feel like the man who once walked away. He felt like the man Eve always believed he could be. And the one Hope had chosen, over and over, without hesitation, without condition, just love. She woke up before sunrise, pajamas rumpled, hair wild, eyes wide, the way only kids get when they know the world is about to feel different. Graham was already up. He'd been up since 4. Balloons half deflated from failed tying attempts. Pancakes slightly burned. Wrapping paper stuck to his fingers. But the smile on his face? Completely unshakable. He had never thrown a birthday party before. Not even for himself. But today wasn't just a birthday. It was Hope's first one with a father. She walked into the kitchen, feet bare, blanket trailing behind her. He turned, holding a cupcake with a single lit candle, and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." She blinked, then whispered. No one ever said that before it was lunchtime. He knelt. Well, get used to it. From now on, it's sunrise cupcakes and bedtime balloon wishes. She giggled and blew out the candle. But when she opened her gift, she stopped laughing. Because inside the box wasn't a toy. It was a photo frame. 3 pictures. One of Eve, smiling on a beach. One of Graham and Hope, building a blanket fort. And in the middle, a drawing. Hope's from months ago. The one she made the night she called him Dad. He'd saved it, framed it, held it close all this time. Her eyes welled. "You remembered," she whispered. "I never forgot," he said. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A small necklace. Simple, gold, engraved with 2 words. Always chosen. He fastened it around her neck, voice barely steady. "You weren't a rescue, Hope. You were a gift. The best I've ever been given." She threw her arms around his neck. And in that moment, for the first time in her life, Hope didn't feel like someone waiting to be loved. She felt like someone who had always been, and always would be. They danced in the living room. Just the 2 of them. One small family the world once thought didn't belong together. But now, they didn't care about headlines. They had home. When the dancing slowed, and the stars blinked softly through her bedroom window, he helped her into bed. Hope was still humming the silly tune they'd made up in the living room. "Did I do okay today?" she asked softly, eyes fluttering closed. He smiled, sat beside her. "You were perfect." She reached out, fingertips brushing the photo of Eve beside her nightlight. "Even when I talk about Mommy?" "Especially then," he said. "She'd be so proud of you." She rolled on her side. "Do you think she saw us dancing?" "I think she never stopped watching." Hope pulled the blanket up under her chin. "Next year, can we do the same thing? Just us? Sunrise cupcakes. Dancing. Home." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Every year. Always." She closed her eyes, and in the quiet that followed, he stayed there a little longer. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Not guarding, just being. The kind of presence that doesn't come from obligation, but from love. Thank you for staying until the very end. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that healing is messy, that love takes time, that showing up matters more than saying the perfect thing, then you were meant to be here. Because what you just heard wasn't just a story about a CEO or a little girl. It was about us. About anyone who's ever lost something and found something better in its place. About anyone who thought they missed their chance, but still tried again. And if that's you, you're not alone. Subscribe to Hearts of the Rich and like this video right now. Not just for the algorithm, but to help these kinds of stories reach the people who need them. We release new stories every week. Real emotion, real redemption, every time. And tell us in the comments, what moment stayed with you the most? Was it when she called him dad? Or when he finally believed he deserved to be? Type, he showed up, if this one hit your soul. Until next time, take care of your heart, take care of your story, and never stop believing in second chances.